What's up, guys? Today I'm going to do a disassembly of the Jiabaile 143 scale little RC car, and also talk about the differences between the original version and the gyro version, and also talk about some future upgrades or some modifications or ideas for modding these things, like turning them into a rear-wheel drive and also increasing the steering angle, which all of those are going to be kind of tough to do with these cars the way they're designed. I'll go over all that in the video. But first I'll do the quick and easy little differences between everything. So on the right over here is the gyro version. The electronics board is black compared to the original ones that are green. So there's really not much to that. Let's see, the smallest little thing that I've seen in differences is the LEDs. So, well, this really has nothing to do with the gyro version or the original version. This is for all of them. So if you get the Skyline and the Porsche, the electronics are going to have these type of LEDs in the front, and then the little LEDs for the back for the red taillights are right here. And if you get the Mustang or the BMW, they're not going to have those kind of headlights in the front. They're going to have these tiny little white LEDs soldered down here on the bottom, and then they're going to put the tiny little red LEDs on the bottom as well. So if you're going to, like, say, swap out bodies on different chassis, you can swap the Mustang and the BMW with each other, which I've already done because I wanted to run the gyro on my BMW since I already had the BMW, the original version, and the last one I didn't have was the Mustang, so I bought the gyro version of the Mustang. But I can actually put this gyro board on this chassis of the Beamer, and the LEDs and everything won't interfere with the body because it's the same exact style. They have the same exact little tiny LEDs for the headlights and taillights, so they can be swapped out easily without any issues. Now, if you wanted to put, like, you can't, like, take one of these for the Skyline and put it on the BMW, because these little headlight, these little diode LEDs here for the headlights will actually interfere with the hood underneath the body here, so you won't be able to put the body all the way down. It'll actually hit these LEDs to where it won't be able to fit. So same thing with the Porsche. It has the same kind of LEDs, so you can swap out the Skyline and Porsche electronics, and you can swap out the BMW and Mustang electronics. So if you ever want to, like, swap them around for any reason, like you want to change the bodies on them or whatever, so like I said, the Mustang and BMW can be swapped while the Porsche and the Skyline can be swapped. The only difference with the Porsche, though, is you can't swap the actual chassis with the wheels over to, like, the Skyline body, because the wheels are actually bigger on the Porsche. So it has bigger and wider rear tires with a little bit more narrow but still big front tires compared to the other ones that are really small. But the BMW, the Skyline, and the Mustang all seem to have the same size wheels. So you could swap pretty much all three of these chassis, but you can't swap them with the Porsche because for some reason they just had to make them bigger on the Porsche. I really don't know why they did that. So that's just something to keep in mind if you want to, like, say, swap them around for whatever reason. And if you were going to take off these, like the whole electronic board from the chassis, it's really easy. There's just 4 little screws, which I already took off on all these just to save some time. But there's one screw that goes here, there's one screw that goes over here, and then one screw there and there. And they're just tiny little Phillips head screws. Pretty much the same screw for everything they use on this entire chassis to hold the electronics on and to hold all the little bits and pieces together on the chassis. So it doesn't matter if you mix them up or not, they're all the same thing. So that's all you have to do to take off the electronics, is unscrew those 4, and then you have to disconnect all the connectors, which you gotta take the servo connector out, and then I already took the battery one off just in case I touch anything. I just wanted to have it disconnected. So you would unplug the battery from this connector here, and then the motor disconnects from there. So if you take these apart and you forget which connectors go where, just always remember that the battery connector goes here in the middle, off to the side here, because you don't want to accidentally plug in the motor one into the battery or the battery one into the motor port, because the whole thing will light up and there's a chance you could short it out. So just don't accidentally ever plug in the battery into this motor port. It's not good for it. So just keep that in mind when you take it apart. Just try to remember which connectors go where. It's pretty easy to know where the servo one is because it's the only 3-pin connector on the board. Now, the only difference between the gyro one and the original one is that the battery connector is still in the same spot, but they changed the place of where the servo and the motor connectors are. So just keep that in mind, is that they switch places. So top and bottom there, So now the motor port is down there while the servo port is up here, and it's reversed on the original. So just keep that in mind if you're taking them apart. So yeah, once you unscrew everything, all you have to do is just lift the board up and just make sure you get these little connectors lined up in this little hole and get them out of the way. And then that's all you have to do to take off the electronics off the chassis. So it's really simple to take these apart if you ever need to take them apart and work on them for whatever reason. So on the Porsche, they have little like silver screws, at least for me, while all the other ones I have little black screws. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it's just weird how I guess they just ran out of black screws or whatever when they made this one. But overall, the chassis are all the same, you know, except for the portion that's wheels. The wheels are the only thing that's different. Otherwise, the chassis, the size, and the internals and everything are exactly the same on each one. So I'll take this one apart since I already pretty much took all the screws out, so I could take it apart quickly. But there's a front differential in here, and it's not an open differential like you would want on, or not open, but it's not a front one-way diff like you would want an all-wheel drive drift setup, because it's way too small. I don't think they could really make a front one-way, or at least if they were going to make it, it would probably be expensive to make because it would be really, really small. I can't imagine how hard that would be to make a front one-way that's as small as this differential that's in here. But it's also not an open diff, it's a lock diff. It's just like a tiny little metal rod with a plastic gear on it and plastic cups for these tiny little dog bones that go to it in there, which I'll take it apart and show you in a minute. So just keep that in mind, that it's not like a normal all-wheel drive drift setup, kind of like the MA020 Mini Z, which usually you want to run a front one-way diff in here, but you know, this thing's much larger, so you can actually have one that is functioning in the front, while this one's just way too small. I don't think they could make a front one-way small enough to fit inside these. And I noticed also the steering mechanism is very similar to the Mini Z MA020. So you can see the tie rod here. That's what they use on the Mini Z here. So that's exactly the same kind of thing they went with on these little 143 scale cars. There's a tiny little plastic tie rod there. So that's something to keep in mind. That's also why the steering is limited, so you can't really go too much further than this. Also, if you want to do any steering mods to this car, if you're going to use the stock electronics, the electronic board and the chassis won't allow you to turn much further than this, because the wheels will actually hit the electronics board, so it'll interfere. So if you want to get, you know, some more steering angle out of these, it's going to be really tough to do without completely swapping out the electronics, because this board is actually going to be in the way of the wheel. When you turn in, it's going to actually hit there and then hit here. So you really can't, you know, max out the steering angle on these with the stock setup. You're going to have to figure out something else, like putting your own ESC and receiver in here, and then, you know, messing with this front end a little bit, and then you could, you know, make the steering angle larger. But right now, with the way they are, if you keep these, like, you know, the stock electronics on, you're not going to get much further than that. So I have a few ideas I'm going to try to make work, because I am going to do a rear wheel drive setup, and then also try to increase the steering. So I'll talk about that while I'm taking this one apart, and then, you know, we'll just kind of brainstorm a little bit on what we can do, what we can make work. Because I mean, you're kind of limited to your options with this whole setup unless you like completely 3D print a whole new chassis, you know, and just like start taking parts from other things and try to make that work. Which I have actually some spare parts that I'm going to try to make work with a custom build I'll do. So I got like a little servo with the metal gear on here, and then some of these little tiny little metal balls here with the joints to go along with them. And then also there's this little, what do you call it, diff, this little diff I can make with metal cups and everything, but these might be too big, these rods might be too big, with the dog bones and stuff. I'll see what I can do, if I can make those work. I'm pretty sure I can make this work, and I'll definitely be able to make this little Metal Gear digital servo work, but I don't know if I'll be able to make that work. It might be too big once I put it all together and stuff. So those are just some things I found on AliExpress that I ordered. Because I might just make one of these from the ground up. I was thinking about, you know, doing a conversion of turning it into rear-wheel drive, and then you know, maxing out the steering angle and just like doing whatever I can on this chassis, but it might be a pain to do that. I might just build one from the ground up and just use the little 143 scale like diecast bodies that are out there, you know, from Barago and CCA, which I think is Cool Chick Auto or whatever, but I got this from CCA. They're metal, so they can be a little bit heavier than the plastic bodies, and that's what I'm worried about, is if these metal bodies will get too heavy for like the little motors to handle on, you know, 1S and stuff. So I'll see what I can make work, you know, what I can make work with that. I'll have to try to slim down the weight on this as much as I can. But I already took this one apart. It was on one of these little chassis that has these little mechanisms where you pull back and then it, you know, it just drives forward. So, but yeah, I would like to use, you know, different bodies and stuff on my own little 143 scale car, because this is almost exactly the same size as, say, you know, the BMW or the Mustang and the Skyline. Porsche, it's close, about the same size too, but as you can see, the wheel wells almost line up just where they need to be. So I could almost make this work on one of these chassis, but this Lambo is pretty low profile, so I don't know if I'll be able to do that without completely just like redoing the front end and making sure there's enough space to make that work. So that's, you know, one of the ideas I got going on right now, where I might just build my own from scratch, or if I can modify one of these to fit those bodies, then I'll go that route as well. But I might make one of these modified for you guys, so you get an idea of like, maybe if, you know, you want to try to do it yourself to do the same thing, and then also make one of my own from scratch that I can use those metal die-cast bodies on. So, all right, let's get into the disassembly part. I know I've been talking for a while already, and like I said, I took off most of the screws, so I can just do this quickly. Now there's 4 screws that hold down the front end here with the differential, so be careful, because once these things fall off, you know, it's hard to put them back together. I already lost that little spring. So there's the tiny little spring that goes on top of these, let me just grab that, the wheel hubs, these knuckles. So I'll have to find that after I do this. But these tiny little dog bones too are real easy to lose, especially if you drop on like a white table, you can't even see them. So that's how, you know, small and, you know, plastic these parts are. So let me get this out of the way. Still on there. Sorry about the focus and everything. It's just hard to do this right now. Okay. Okay, so this is the differential in the front. So you got these little knuckles with the dog bones on both sides with the tiny little spring on top. Hopefully I can find the other little springs. I already lost that one. So just be careful when you're taking these apart. Make sure you do it in an area that if you drop one, you're going to be able to get it back, because if you drop it on the floor, it might be impossible to find. So yeah, this is the differential. You can see that it's just a tiny little, like, solid, you know, rigid axle. Come on. So 2 little bearings, 2 little plastic cups on the sides, and then this plastic gear. And nothing moves, it's solid, so it doesn't spin or rotate. Of course, this bearing is going to get in the grease. So I was thinking about using this in the rear end to give it, like, you know, a nice little solid rigid rear axle. If I want to try to add suspension in the back, then I can use this with, say, these little dog bones. Come on. And then I can have some rear suspension, just kind of almost do what they did in the front and the back, and then get rid of that solid metal rod that they have holding the back wheels on, which I'll show you that in a second as well. So yeah, that's what the front looks like. It's a solid little rigid axle. It's not a one-way, it's not a front one-way, it's not an open diff, it's just a solid piece held together with a tiny little metal rod, and it's plastic, so just keep that in mind. The steering mechanism, like I said, is just a tiny little plastic tie rod that the servo just pushes back and forth with this little screw, which you guys can already see that when it's together. So, and then of course the gear and the drive shaft going back to the rear. So I guess I'll just take this thing completely apart, and then I'm not gonna put it back together on this video because it's gonna take too much time. So just take this screw out for the servo. So here's a little servo. It's a little plastic gear one, so that's why I want to upgrade mine to a tiny little metal gear one. I mean, I don't think you really need a metal one. I mean, the plastic one probably does fine. But when I'm doing like the max steering angle and stuff, I just want to make sure I got enough, you know, durability with the servo. So that's why I went with the metal one for the one I'm going to upgrade. But here's a little tie rod. So I don't like this method for, you know, steering because you're really limited to how far you can push it left and right. So we'll see what we can do about upgrading that to a different idea. Kind of like what I did on my wltoys. Instead of like the mini Z version, I want something that can go like, you know, all the way. So maybe I can do a tiny little T bracket setup like I did with this, but we'll see about that. Because everything's so small in this, it's gonna be really tough to make a lot of this work because the parts are gonna be so tiny and not very reliable when it comes to durability and stuff. And 3D printing parts that are this small really complicates things. So I'll see what I can do. All right, so here's a little battery in here. And it's a 1S LiPo, 200 milliamp. Now, I'm pretty sure this is LiPo. This is not a lithium ion because the bottom of the car says lithium ion, but this looks like a lithium polymer battery to me. I don't think it's a lithium ion, so that's kind of misleading. I mean, if it is a lithium ion, you know, it looks exactly like a lithium polymer battery, so very confusing if it is. But overall, if it is a LiPo battery, if you're gonna like keep this thing, like if the battery's plugged in all the time, it's not good for the LiPo, especially if it's fully charged, that these can actually puff up. And the battery can puff and get, you know, damaged over time to where it won't be good anymore and it won't be able to hold its full charge and it won't last as long. So if you're not going to drive it for a long time, you want to kind of drain the battery down to about 3.8 volts. Because when you fully charge these, it's about 4.2 volts. And then if you go any lower than 3.3 volts, you can actually do damage to these little LiPo batteries. So it sucks because you can't really tell the voltage of what this battery is at when you're driving it. So when it gets low battery, just try not to keep driving it too much to where you're going to destroy the LiPo. And if you're not going to drive it for a long time, you want to put it in storage voltage, which is 3.8 volts. So you want to kind of like, you know, knock it down to 3.8 as best as you can, like drive it around for a couple minutes or something, and then, you know, leave it alone for a while. Otherwise, if you just fully charge it all the way and leave it sitting, the battery can puff up over time and then it won't work as well as it would from, like, say you first got it. So keep that in mind as well. So here's a little tiny motor. It's one of these little tiny brushed motors that's in here. And I got one more screw holding this together before everything falls apart. And if you're wondering what that is, that's a little piece of double-sided tape that I put because the electronic board, especially with the Mustang body, the back trunk of the Mustang was pushing the electronic boards into the plastic. It was putting too much pressure on it. So I put a little bit of, you know, double-sided tape to help soften that. So also if it's bouncing around and stuff, it's, you know, it's not like making too much hard contact with the electronics board. So I just put that, especially with the gyro version, just to help dampen any vibrations that are going on that are getting to the electronics. I mean, you don't have to do that, that's just something I did. So here's the rear end, tiny little brush motor, tiny little drive shaft here, and then this is why we can't have any rear suspension. The wheels are attached to one little metal rod with this little plastic gear just mounted in the center there. And this is why we can't have individual suspension on each wheel like you can in the front with this little guy. So I was debating on bringing this out from the front and putting it in the rear end over here, and then using, like, you know, this setup in the back with the little dog bones so you can get the individual suspension in the back. And then we're gonna have to redesign something different for the front end. So maybe take these wheels and just, you know, cut them off of there or pull them off the metal rod, and then make a new design to where these can get their own suspension in the front, and then these can be used in the back. That's just an idea I'm just kind of thinking about here, you know, using these stock parts. But yeah, this is why there's no rear suspension. It's just a solid rod on these little plastic wheels with this gear. So, and then there's the little gear to the drive shaft to the motor. So, and that's really all there is to this thing. I mean, there's nothing else going on. It's a really basic, simple, you know, design. You know, some people say you don't really need rear suspension on these cars. That's why this design is actually okay for this style. But I at least want like a little bit. So maybe like one of those T-mount style where you just like have this cut here and then like a little bracket that connects the two pieces. So this rear end can kind of like bounce, you know, separate from the main part of the chassis. And you can just keep this the way it is. And then at least you can have like some suspension. It won't be like individual suspension for each wheel, but the whole back end will be able to bounce up and down on its own, compared to try to just, you know, dampen the bodies like we've been doing with that little spring mod that's going on, which is not really doing anything when it comes to suspension of the actual chassis. It's just making the body less bouncy. That's all it's doing. So these are some of the ideas, you know, that I've been kind of brainstorming and thinking about, and I really haven't had time to work on these because, you know, the hurricanes and whatnot. So I've been kind of behind on all these projects compared to where I want to be right now. But like I said, I might have to just 3D print a whole new chassis to kind of make things work better, or I can just try to modify this as best I can, make something work back here to where I can get this little diff to work in this area. Which, I mean, it seems like it's got potential there. I just have to make like some kind of little mount to keep this thing, you know, still and lined up correctly. And then we can put these little wheels back here with the little dog bones, and then they can bounce up and down and have individual suspension. So that's like one of the best ideas I can come up with so far to fix the suspension problem in the rear. And then we're just gonna have to redesign a whole new front end, you know, get rid of the drive shaft here. Probably just have to cut it, or I really don't want to cut it just because I want to go back, but I might have to. So yeah, just either that or just take off the tiny little gear and just leave the metal shaft there. And then come up with a whole new setup here where we can get more steering angle, maybe like center the servo more, and then make a different design that can really push the wheels left and right further. Like, you know, I have this metal one. Might end up trying to use too, but then again, I might use this for my own custom build. I might not even use it for these, since it's really probably not necessary. So yeah, these are the ideas I got going on. I'm pretty sure you guys also have a lot of good ideas that you might, you know, be coming up with, that you might try out, and let me know how that works out. If you guys do come up with anything that, you know, is good, that works, I'll just keep doing what I can, and hopefully I'm gonna try to do it with, you know, the least amount of 3D prints as possible, so other people can, you know, kind of modify it without having to worry about 3D printing stuff. But there's no guarantee though, because I mean, this is probably not gonna work without 3D printing something. So this is where I'm at right now when it comes to the future upgrades of the Jiabaile 143 scale little RC car. Yeah, if you guys have any questions or any other ideas, just like I said, you know, leave some comments down below, and then we can try to brainstorm and figure out the best method to kind of upgrade these things for everybody. Hopefully they'll come out with a version 3 here in the future that has like rear suspension, and I won't have to deal with this. But it kind of sucks that I already bought all these, and then if they come out with a new version, I'm gonna have to buy another one. I really don't want to do that. So, but I mean, it is what it is. We'll see how it goes. So once again, thanks for watching. This video is dragged out long enough, so I'm just gonna cut it here, and then I'll you know, probably make another video on something else here soon. So, all right guys, have a good day.